The morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of Margaret Lewis's kitchen, casting delicate patterns on the wooden table. The house was silent, save for the occasional tick of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Once, this kitchen had been alive with the clatter of breakfast dishes, the slam of the screen door as her children ran off to school, and the sound of her husband humming while he read the morning paper. Now, at 55, the house was still. Too still. Maggie, as her friends called her, sat at the table with a steaming mug of coffee, both hands wrapped around it as if it were an anchor. She had retired from her job as an elementary school teacher just a year earlier. Her colleagues had celebrated her with balloons and cake, praising her decades of service. Her children, now grown and living in different states, had called to congratulate her. Everyone said she had earned her rest. But rest, she realized, was overrated. At first, retirement felt like a vacation. She caught up on novels she'd been meaning to read, planted tulips in her garden, and took long walks around her neighborhood in the Boston suburbs. But the novelty wore off quickly. Days began to blur together, each one indistinguishable from the next. She had imagined retirement would feel like freedom, but instead, it felt like exile. The silence of the house pressed on her in ways she hadn't expected. The walls seemed to echo with absence, her husband David, gone for nearly 5 years now after a sudden heart attack, her children Sarah and Ben, living busy adult lives hundreds of miles away. She told herself she should be proud. Sarah had become a nurse in Chicago, Ben an engineer in Seattle. They were thriving, independent. That was what she and David had worked so hard for. And she was proud, deeply. But pride didn't fill the evenings when she sat alone at the dinner table with a plate of reheated leftovers. Sometimes she turned on the TV for background noise, leaving it to chatter away while she scrolled aimlessly on her phone. Other times she let the quiet swallow her, curling up on the couch under a blanket, staring at the ceiling, wondering, is this it? Is this what the rest of my life looks like? Her friends didn't seem to understand. You're lucky, said Marjorie, her neighbor down the street. No more grading papers, no more early alarms. You can relax now. Relax. Maggie bit back a smile. How could she explain that relaxation had turned into restlessness? That instead of joy, she felt something closer to grief? At church, when acquaintances asked how she was enjoying retirement, she gave the polite answer, "Oh, it's lovely. I finally have time for myself." They nodded approvingly, never suspecting how hollow the words felt on her tongue. One Tuesday morning, after another restless night, Maggie wandered into her late husband's study. Dust had gathered on the bookshelves. His reading glasses still rested on the desk, as if he might return any moment. She sat in his chair and ran her hand over the worn armrest, a wave of longing washing over her. You'd know what to do, she whispered into the empty room. David had always been her compass. Without him, she felt adrift. Her gaze fell on a framed photo of their family taken 20 years earlier, Sarah holding a puppy, Ben laughing, David's arm wrapped around her. They had once fostered stray animals for a local shelter, a chaotic but joyful chapter of their lives. She remembered the sound of paws skittering on hardwood floors, the wagging tails, the purrs. For the first time in weeks, her lips curved into a genuine smile. The smile faded as quickly as it came. That was the past. Now, her days were filled with quiet walks, solitary meals, and the nagging question she couldn't escape, what am I supposed to do with the rest of my life? The loneliness hit hardest in the evenings. One night, she microwaved a bowl of soup and sat at the table alone. The chair across from her remained stubbornly empty. She tried calling Sarah, but it went to voicemail. Ben texted a quick reply, busy at work. Call you tomorrow. She set the phone down and sighed. The soup cooled in front of her as she stared out the window into the darkness. For the first time, she admitted the truth aloud, I feel invisible. The words startled her. They sounded foreign, yet undeniable. The following weekend, Maggie attended a neighborhood potluck. The chatter of couples and families buzzed around her, but she felt like an observer, not a participant. She filled her plate with casserole and sat at the edge of the group, smiling politely, nodding at conversations she couldn't connect to. When she returned home, the silence of her house greeted her like a heavy cloak. She dropped her purse on the counter and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. I need something more, she whispered into the empty kitchen. I can't keep living like this. That night, as she tossed and turned in bed, a thought surfaced, maybe what she needed wasn't more relaxation, but more responsibility. Something, or someone, to care for. She had spent her life caring, for her students, for her children, for her husband. Without that role, she felt unmoored. The idea lingered as dawn crept in. She rose early, made her coffee, and opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing, volunteer opportunities near me. Dozens of results appeared, food banks, hospitals, community gardens. But one listing caught her eye: animal shelter needs volunteers, help abandoned dogs and cats find homes. Her heart gave a strange little leap. The next day, Maggie drove past the shelter, a modest building tucked behind a row of shops. She slowed the car, glancing at the chain-link fences, the shapes of dogs pacing inside. Their barks carried faintly on the breeze. She gripped the steering wheel, torn between curiosity and fear. Was she really the kind of woman who could walk into a shelter and help? Or was she too old, too fragile, too out of practice? The light turned green. She drove on, her heart pounding. But the image of those dogs lingered in her mind long after she reached home. That evening, she stood at the sink washing dishes, lost in thought. The silence pressed in again, but this time it carried an echo, the faint sound of barking, the memory of her children's laughter as they held a puppy years ago. For the first time in months, the silence didn't just remind her of what she had lost. It hinted at what she might still find. And so, as the clock ticked toward midnight, Maggie whispered into the stillness, "Maybe tomorrow I'll stop the car." The next morning, Maggie dressed without thinking. Soft sweater, worn jeans, sneakers that remembered long walks, and found herself standing by the front door with her keys in hand. She hadn't planned to go anywhere. Yet there she was, watching the late morning light slide across the hardwood floor, feeling that small tug in her chest again. Just a drive, she told herself. You don't have to go in. The streets of her neighborhood were familiar and kind, maple-lined, stoops dressed in mums, a child's chalk drawing still bright on the sidewalk from yesterday's sun. She passed the bakery where she used to take Sarah for cinnamon buns after piano lessons, then turned toward the row of brick storefronts. The shelter sat behind them, a modest building with a mural of bright paw prints and a faded banner, "Open Hearts, Open Homes." She pulled into a spot and left the engine running. Through the chain-link fence, she could make out the shapes of dogs moving back and forth, some anxious, some curious. A black and white dog pressed its nose to the fence and tilted its head, as if questioning the woman in the idling car. Maggie's fingers hovered over the ignition. "You can drive away," the familiar voice of fear suggested. "You're 55. You haven't done anything like this in years. What if you can't handle it? The smells, the noise, the sadness." But the black and white dog tilted its head again, and she heard herself say, "Okay," as she turned off the car and stepped out. Inside, the air held a cocktail of bleach, shampoo, and animal musk. Not pleasant, not terrible, just honest. A bell over the door chimed, and a young woman at the front desk looked up with a smile that reached her eyes. "Hi there. First time?" "Yes," Maggie answered, realizing her voice sounded small. I saw your posting about volunteers. Perfect timing." The young woman, whose name badge read Tara, slid a clipboard across the counter. "We always need extra hands. I'll give you the quick tour, and we'll get you a form. What's your name?" "Maggie." "Welcome, Maggie. You picked a good day. We got a transport in last night, so everyone's extra talkative." Tara grinned and gestured toward the hallway. "Earplugs are to the left if you're shy." They walked the corridor together. On one side, a row of glass-fronted cat rooms, sunlit and quiet, tails flicking like punctuation marks in a sentence. On the other side, the dog kennels, chain-link doors, blankets folded in the corners, stainless steel bowls clinking as the canine chorus rose and fell. The noise rolled over Maggie in waves, startling at first, then oddly energizing. Life, loud and unfiltered. Tara spoke over the din. "We're a small non-profit. Lots of surrenders lately, people moving, medical bills, you name it. But we place a lot of animals too. Volunteers walk, feed, clean, socialize. That last one's a fancy word for loving on them until they remember people can be good." Maggie nodded. She pictured David's old study and the photo of her children holding that foster puppy. "I used to be a teacher," she blurted, surprising herself. "Elementary school." Perfect, Tara said, as if Maggie had presented a credential stamped in gold. Patience and snacks, that's 90% of rescue. She stopped at a kennel halfway down. This is the one who's been staring at you since you parked. Meet Domino. The black and white dog stepped forward, cautious but eager, a patchwork of spots like spilled ink. Up close, Maggie saw the tremble at his shoulder, the two prominent ribs beneath a fresh bath's fluff. Hi Domino, she murmured, crouching. He sniffed her fingers, then glanced up as if asking a question she somehow understood. Are you safe? Will you stay? He came in last night, Tara said. No chip, no collar. He's sweet, just unsure. You want to try a short walk? I'll get you a slip lead. Maggie's heart thudded. She imagined herself fumbling, tangling the leash, doing everything wrong. But Domino pressed closer to the gate, and the question in his eyes softened into something like hope. Yes, she heard herself say. I'd like that. Outside, the autumn air felt crisp and forgiving. Domino trotted beside her, pausing to sniff the grass as if memorizing the day. Maggie held the lead loosely, the way she used to hold a child's hand crossing the street, secure but not tight. Under the din of the kennels, under the echo of years spent caregiving and then not, something quiet unclenched in her chest. You're doing great, she told Domino, and realized she was telling herself too. They made a slow loop around the building. A volunteer passed with a senior terrier in a sweater. Harold, age 13, a gentleman, she announced proudly, and Maggie found herself laughing. Domino wagged, the tremor at his shoulder easing with every step. Back inside, Tara showed her the laundry room, the beating heart, she joked, and the small kitchen where volunteers labeled baggies of food with Sharpies. Sasha, sensitive stomach, Bear, extra kibble, Lulu, meds at dinner. There was a whiteboard with a list of tasks and a calendar speckled with names. A framed photo showed a grinning family holding a brindled pit bull under a banner that read adopted. Would you be up for some cat socializing after lunch? Tara asked, handing Maggie a paper cup of water. Or we can stick with dogs, no pressure. Maggie took a sip and exhaled. She'd been braced for sadness, but what she felt, threading through the noise and need, was motion. Purpose moving on visible rails. I can do cats, she said. And dogs. Whatever you need. Music to my ears, Tara said. Let's get you the volunteer form. It's mostly contact info and a few boring waivers that say you won't sue us if Harold decides he's a lapdog. At a small desk in the corner, Maggie filled in the blanks. Margaret Lewis, phone, email, emergency contact, Sarah Lewis. Her hand hesitated at the line labeled occupation. She wrote retired teacher, then paused, drew a small breath, and added in a careful print beneath it, volunteer. It seemed absurdly official to name something after a single hour on the job. But the word steadied her. She wasn't just a woman rattling around in a too-quiet house. She was a pair of hands, a presence, a yes. When she returned the clipboard, Tara scanned it quickly. We usually ask for a weekly shift, 2 hours. We're flexible. Mornings are feeding and cleaning, afternoons are enrichment and walks. What's your schedule like? Open, Maggie said, and heard how that could mean lonely. I mean, mornings would be good. Tuesdays and Fridays. Done. Tara smiled. You'll shadow me this week, then we'll let you fly. They spent the next hour folding blankets warm from the dryer, labeling canned food, and learning the shelter's small rituals, 2 fingers for the treat jar, slow approaches for shy dogs, greeting cats with a fingertip like a polite handshake. In a sunlit room, a gray tabby named Marshmallow rolled onto her back and presented a plush belly. In the next, a sleek tortoiseshell blinked slowly, the universal cat signal for I accept you. Maggie's shoulders lowered, breath by breath. The noise didn't vanish, but it found a rhythm she could move inside of. At noon, someone set out a plate of grocery store cookies with a handwritten note, "Thank you, volunteers. You keep them safe until they find home. Lori." Maggie took a cookie and stood by the window overlooking the small dog yard. Domino bounded after a blue rubber ball, all legs and joy, then skidded to a stop and glanced toward the glass as if to make sure she was still there. She lifted her hand in a small wave. He barked once, delighted. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, "Hey Mom, how's your Tuesday?" Maggie stared at the screen, then snapped a photo of Domino mid-bounce and sent it with a reply, "I started volunteering at the animal shelter today. Meet Domino." There was a pause long enough to make her wonder if she'd said the wrong thing. Then 3 dots and Mom. That's amazing. You always loved doing that. Dad would be proud. A second later, another bubble. Are you okay? Maggie typed, I think I'm better than okay, and felt the truth of it as she hit send. When she finally walked back to her car, her legs were tired and her sweater smelled faintly of bleach and puppy breath. A smear of grey cat fur clung to her sleeve like confetti after a parade. She slid into the driver's seat and sat for a moment, both hands resting lightly on the wheel, a small astonished smile tugging her mouth. The neighborhood looked the same as it had that morning. Brick storefronts, the bakery, the mural of paw prints, but something in her had shifted by a degree you could only feel, not see. The house waiting for her would still be quiet. The grandfather clock would still tick. Yet the silence no longer felt like a verdict. It felt like a space she could fill. She started the engine and glanced at the passenger seat where Tara had tucked a volunteer handbook, photocopied, dog-eared, topped with a sticky note in a cheerful scroll, Welcome Maggie. See you Friday. T. As she pulled onto the road, Maggie spoke aloud, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I'll be back. The black and white dog's face rose in her mind, hopeful and questioning. For the first time in months, the question inside her had a simple, solid answer. Yes. She would be back. The following Friday dawned grey and drizzly, the kind of day that made Maggie want to curl up with a blanket and a book. But at 10 o'clock sharp, she pulled into the parking lot of the shelter. A nervous flutter stirred in her stomach. She had agreed to this, volunteering twice a week, and now the commitment was real. Inside, the building buzzed with the energy of a dozen lives in motion. A chorus of barks greeted her the moment she opened the door, a jumble of notes rising and falling like an orchestra without a conductor. A faint smell of wet fur mingled with disinfectant, and the floor was damp from the morning's mop. Maggie, you came back. Tara appeared from the laundry room, her ponytail bouncing, hands gloved and holding a stack of folded towels. Perfect timing. We've got a busy morning. Want to help me with dog runs? Maggie nodded, though her throat felt dry. Sure. The kennel corridor stretched ahead, lined with chain-link doors. Dogs pressed noses to the mesh, tails wagging or ears flat, eyes wide with longing. The sound was overwhelming, yelps, howls, whines, all demanding attention. Tara handed Maggie a spray bottle and a stack of clean blankets. We'll rotate them one by one. Pull out the old bedding, give a quick spray, fresh blanket, fresh water. Move fast but gentle. Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. The first kennel housed a brown hound mix who leapt against the door with enough force to rattle the latch. Maggie froze, heart racing. Don't let it scare you, Tara said calmly. He's just excited. Here, watch. She opened the door slightly, slipped in a slip lead, and guided the dog out with practiced ease. Okay, he's ready for a walk with Tom. Your turn, Maggie. Grab the blanket. Her hands shook as she bent to pick up the damp bedding. The smell of urine clung to her nose, sharp and sour. She sprayed the floor, wiped quickly, and spread the new blanket. When the hound returned, he leapt straight onto it, circling twice before plopping down with a sigh. Maggie smiled, tension melting from her shoulders. That wasn't so bad. But the next kennel tested her resolve. Inside was a tiny white terrier with matted fur and eyes clouded by age. She crouched and whispered hello there, but the dog bared his teeth in a low growl. Maggie flinched. He's scared, Tara explained. Had a rough life before he came here. Just move slowly. With trembling fingers, Maggie reached for the old bedding. The terrier snapped at the air, teeth clicking inches from her hand. Her instinct screamed to pull back, to abandon the task. But then she looked into his eyes, tired, wary, but not without a glimmer of hope. Something inside her shifted. She spoke softly, steadying her breath. It's okay, sweetheart. I'm not going to hurt you. The growl eased to a whimper. Inch by inch, she replaced the bedding. When the terrier finally curled into the clean blanket, a surprising warmth filled her chest. She hadn't solved his problems, but she'd given him comfort, however small. By midday, her clothes smelled of bleach and dog hair clung to her sweater. Her arms ached from scrubbing and lifting. She wanted to collapse into a chair, but there were still bowls to wash and cats to feed. In the cat wing, The atmosphere was calmer but no less demanding. One room held a litter of kittens who swarmed her ankles, claws sharp as pins. Another held a regal orange tabby who ignored her entirely until she produced a feather toy, at which point he pounced with surprising grace. Maggie laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from her own lips in months. The cats didn't care about her age, her loneliness, or her uncertain future. They cared that she was there, offering attention, food, play. At lunch, the volunteers gathered in the break room. The table overflowed with mismatched mugs, a box of donuts, and a pile of donated leashes. "So Maggie," asked Tom, a retired firefighter with kind eyes, "what brought you to us?" She hesitated. What could she say? That her house was too quiet, that she was drowning in invisibility. Instead, she offered a half-truth. "I just had time. And I love animals." "That's enough," Tom said with a nod. "They don't care why you're here. Just that you are." The others chimed in with laughter and stories: a dog who'd chewed through 3 leashes, a cat who insisted on riding shoulders like a parrot. Maggie listened, warmth seeping into her. She belonged at this table in a way she hadn't felt in years. The afternoon brought her back to Domino. He greeted her with a wiggle that shook his entire body, tail thumping against the kennel door. "You remember me," Maggie whispered as she slipped on his lead. Outside, they walked in the drizzle. His ears flopped, paws splashing through puddles, and Maggie couldn't help laughing. For half an hour, she wasn't a widow or a retiree searching for meaning. She was simply a woman walking a dog, sharing the uncomplicated joy of fresh air and companionship. When it was time to return him to the kennel, Domino pressed his nose into her palm. Maggie's throat tightened. "I'll see you soon," she promised. That night, back in her quiet kitchen, Maggie peeled off her sweater and dropped it in the laundry basket. The faint scent of bleach still clung to her skin, but underneath was something new, the earthy smell of dog fur, the warmth of life clinging to fabric. She sank into her chair with sore muscles and an exhausted smile. For the first time since retirement, she felt a different kind of tired, not the heavy, aimless fatigue of loneliness, but the satisfying ache of having mattered. The chaos of the shelter had tested her, frightened her, overwhelmed her, but it had also filled a void she hadn't realized was so deep. She opened her journal and wrote, "Today I was scared. Today I was clumsy. Today I got snapped at, clawed, and covered in fur. And today, for the first time in a long while, I felt alive." By her 3rd week at the shelter, Maggie's Tuesday and Friday mornings had become a rhythm. She rose early, pulled on jeans and sneakers, tied her gray-streaked hair back in a ponytail, and drove the now-familiar road with a sense of purpose that felt entirely new. The quiet house was still there when she left, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a starting point. The dogs knew her now. Domino, especially, seemed to anticipate her arrival. The moment he heard her voice in the corridor, he wagged so hard his entire body seemed to shake apart. "Good morning to you too," Maggie laughed as she knelt by his kennel. "I brought extra treats today." She slipped one through the bars, and he took it gently, his eyes soft with trust. It surprised her how much she looked forward to seeing him. In those first overwhelming days, she had wondered if she could keep coming back. But with Domino, she found herself counting the hours until she returned. She wasn't only bonding with the animals. The other volunteers had started to feel like companions rather than strangers. There was Tom, the retired firefighter, who had a special way with nervous dogs. "Talk low, move slow," he'd remind her, demonstrating with a German shepherd who cowered at sudden noises. And Rosa, a nurse in her 60s, who always brought a thermos of homemade soup to share during lunch breaks. She had a laugh that filled the room, and Maggie found herself smiling more whenever Rosa was near. One afternoon, as they folded laundry together, Rosa asked, "So what made you come here, Maggie?" Maggie hesitated, then answered honestly. "The house was too quiet. My husband passed 5 years ago. My kids are grown. I needed something that made me feel useful again." Rosa's eyes softened. "I get that. My husband's been gone 3 years. The shelter saved me in more ways than I can count." She nudged Maggie's arm. "Looks like it's doing the same for you." Maggie felt tears prick her eyes but managed to smile. "Yeah, I think it is." Her strongest connection, though, was with a small battered terrier named Max. He had been brought in after being abandoned in a parking lot, his coat matted, his ribs showing. At first, he snapped at everyone, including Maggie. But she couldn't stop thinking about the fear in his eyes. Day by day, she visited him. At first she simply sat outside his kennel, reading aloud from her book in a calm voice. Then she offered bits of chicken, placing them closer each time until finally, one afternoon, Max crept forward and took the food from her hand. The breakthrough left Maggie breathless. She whispered, "Good boy," her voice trembling with emotion. Max's tail gave the smallest wag, and she felt as if she had been handed a fragile gift of trust. That evening, she called Sarah in Chicago. "You'll never believe what happened today," she said, recounting the moment with Max. Her daughter's laughter rang through the phone. "Mom, you sound happier than I've heard you in ages." "I think I am," Maggie admitted. "These animals, they need me. And I think I need them too." The shelter's chaos no longer overwhelmed her, it energized her. She learned which dogs liked long walks and which preferred a gentle cuddle. She discovered that cats, no matter how aloof, could be coaxed into play with patience. She grew stronger, hauling bags of food, scrubbing kennels, carrying laundry baskets. Her arms ached at night, but in a satisfying way. One Friday afternoon, after hours of cleaning, she found herself sitting in the play yard surrounded by puppies from a new litter. They climbed over her legs, tugged at her shoelaces, licked her hands with uncoordinated zeal. She threw her head back and laughed, the sound unguarded, almost childlike. Tom snapped a photo with his phone. "That's the look of someone who belongs here," he said. Maggie glanced at the picture later. Her hair was messy, her sweater covered in paw prints, but her smile was wide and genuine. She barely recognized herself, and yet for the first time in years, she felt she had found the woman she'd always been meant to be. At home, the house felt different too. The silence was still there, but it no longer felt suffocating. She had stories to carry into it now: Domino's antics, Rose's laughter, Max's first wag of the tail. She even started filling her fridge with leftovers from soup shared at the shelter, the flavors a reminder she was part of something bigger than herself. One night, she pulled out her journal and wrote, "I thought I was going there to help them. But maybe they're the ones helping me. For every bowl I fill, every kennel I clean, I feel a little more whole. Maybe purpose doesn't come in grand gestures. Maybe it comes in paw prints, in fur clinging to your sweater, in a frightened dog learning to trust again." She closed the journal and sat quietly, a small smile on her lips. The house wasn't as quiet anymore. In her heart, it was filling with the sounds of paws and purrs, barks and meows, echoes of a new kind of family she hadn't expected to find. The shelter was full of stories, but some clung harder than others, stories written not in words, but in scars, limps and flinches. On a chilly November morning, Tara met Maggie at the door with a look that warned her the day would be different. "We've got a tough intake," she said quietly. "Brought in last night by animal control. His name's Rusty." She led Maggie to the far end of the kennel row. There, huddled in the back corner of a pen, was a medium-sized dog with a rust-colored coat dulled by neglect. His ribs were sharp against his skin, and one ear drooped, scarred and torn. But what hit Maggie hardest were his eyes, wide, glassy, full of a fear so deep it seemed to swallow the light around him. "He's been through something," Tara continued. "We don't know the details yet. For now, keep distance. Let him come to you if he ever does." Maggie's heart clenched. She crouched outside the kennel and whispered, "Hey there, Rusty." But the dog pressed himself tighter into the corner, trembling. She didn't try again. Not that day. For weeks, Maggie made Rusty part of her routine. After walking Domino and folding laundry with Rosa, she would sit by Rusty's kennel for 10 minutes at a time. Sometimes she read aloud from her book. Sometimes she simply hummed softly. She didn't reach for him, didn't push. She just showed up. The first week, Rusty wouldn't look at her. The second, he stopped trembling quite so violently when she approached. By the third week, he flicked one ear in her direction, a tiny acknowledgement that she existed. It was enough to keep her coming back. One Tuesday, Maggie brought a piece of boiled chicken in a small bag. She held it out through the kennel door, her hand steady though her heart raced. Rusty stared at it for a long time, his eyes flicking between her hand and the far wall. Finally, with hesitant steps, he crept forward, snatched the chicken, and darted back to the corner. Maggie's breath caught. She whispered, "Good boy, Rusty," her eyes stinging with tears. That night, she wrote in her journal. Today he trusted me with one step. It doesn't seem like much, but it feels like a miracle. Trust grew slowly, like moss on stone. Rusty learned to take food from her hand without retreating. Then he began creeping closer, until one afternoon, when Maggie extended her fingers cautiously, his cold nose brushed against them. The touch was brief, fleeting, but it was the moment Maggie realized healing wasn't just something you gave. It was something you received. She thought of her own life, of nights curled on the couch listening to the silence of her house, of mornings staring at David's empty chair across the table. She, too, had been curled in her own corner, trembling, waiting for something safe enough to trust. Rusty wasn't the only one learning to come forward. By December, Rusty allowed her to clip on a leash, though his body shook the entire time. Their first walk was hesitant. He startled at every sound, the clatter of a dropped bowl, the squeak of a gate. Maggie walked slowly, speaking softly. "It's okay, boy. You're safe now." At one point, a car door slammed in the distance. Rusty froze, tail tucked, eyes wide. Maggie knelt beside him, her hand hovering near but not touching. "I know," she whispered. "I know what it feels like to be scared of the world. But you're not alone anymore." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, his tail gave the smallest wag. The transformation wasn't quick, and it wasn't linear. Some days Rusty trotted beside her, ears perked. Other days he shut down, refusing to leave his kennel. But Maggie had learned patience across 3 decades of teaching children. She carried that patience into every visit, celebrating small victories, accepting setbacks without judgment. The other volunteers noticed. "He likes you," Tom remarked one afternoon as Rusty leaned ever so slightly against Maggie's leg. "I've never seen him this relaxed with anyone else." Maggie smiled, scratching behind Rusty's scarred ear. "Maybe it's because we're both a little broken." Christmas came, and with it, the shelter's annual adoption fair. Dogs wore red bandanas, cats lounged in festive blankets, and volunteers bustled with candy canes and cocoa. Maggie stood near Rusty's kennel, watching families pass him by. Children squealed over playful puppies. Couples cooed at fluffy kittens. Rusty, pressed to the back of his pen, barely lifted his head. "He's not ready," Maggie whispered to Tara, who nodded sadly. Maggie bent to meet Rusty's eyes. "That's okay," she murmured. "You don't have to be ready yet. I'm not going anywhere." By the new year, Rusty's progress was undeniable. He greeted Maggie at the kennel door, tail wagging faintly. He walked more confidently, sniffed the air, even accepted pets along his back. One afternoon, Rosa snapped a photo, Maggie sitting on the floor, Rusty curled against her side, eyes half closed in trust. Maggie looked at the picture later and felt something stir in her chest. Rusty wasn't the only one who had changed. She saw herself smiling without effort, her shoulders relaxed, her eyes alight. That night, she called Ben in Seattle. "I want to tell you about a dog," she said, launching into Rusty's story. Her son listened, then chuckled. "Mom, you sound lighter, happier." "I think I am," she admitted. "Helping him heal, it's helping me too. I didn't realize how much I still needed that." "Dad would be proud," Ben said softly. Maggie's throat tightened. "I hope so." The bond between Maggie and Rusty deepened, but so did her understanding of herself. She realized healing wasn't about erasing scars. It was about learning to live with them, and maybe even to love them. Rusty still flinched sometimes. Maggie still woke some nights reaching for David. But both of them were moving forward, step by step, choosing trust over fear, presence over absence. On a snowy January afternoon, as Rusty pressed against her leg while she brushed his coat, Maggie whispered, "We're healing together, aren't we?" Rusty looked up, his scarred ear twitching, and gave her hand a single gentle lick. Maggie laughed, the sound spilling into the quiet room like sunlight through clouds. By February, Maggie's Tuesdays and Fridays at the shelter had become as natural as breathing. She still cherished her quiet mornings with coffee, but instead of dreading the silence, she looked forward to filling it, with paws, purrs, wagging tails, and the bustle of people who shared her love for these abandoned souls. The animals gave her purpose, but it was the people, the volunteers, donors, adopters, who began weaving her into a fabric she hadn't realized she was missing: community. The first time she joined a fundraiser, Maggie felt out of her depth. Tara had cornered her one afternoon in the laundry room, arms full of towels. "We're hosting a bake sale downtown on Saturday. Want to help?" Maggie blinked. "Bake? I can barely make brownies from a box." Tara laughed. "You don't have to bake. We need people to talk to the public. Share stories about the shelter. Help us raise money." "Oh." Maggie hesitated. Talking to strangers about the shelter felt daunting. But she thought of Rusty, of Domino, of Max. If telling their stories could help more animals, wasn't that worth trying? "I'll do it," she said finally. Saturday dawned cold but bright. The shelter set up a table at the town square, laden with cupcakes, cookies, and a donation jar shaped like a giant paw print. Volunteers wore matching t-shirts with the shelter's paw print logo. Maggie pulled one over her sweater and felt a rush of nervous excitement. At first, she hovered at the edge, letting Rosa charm passers-by with her booming laugh. But soon a woman approached, drawn by the photos taped to the table. "Who's this?" she asked, pointing to a picture of Rusty, his eyes still wary but softening. Maggie found her voice. "That's Rusty. When he came to us, he was terrified. He wouldn't even lift his head. But now, he wags his tail when he sees me. He's learning to trust again." The woman's eyes misted. She reached into her purse and slipped a 20 into the jar. "Thank you for what you're doing," she said. Warmth bloomed in Maggie's chest. All she had done was tell the truth, yet it mattered. By the end of the day, the shelter had raised hundreds of dollars. More than that, Maggie had discovered the power of sharing, not just stories of animals, but pieces of herself. Community found her in unexpected places. One Sunday, Rosa invited her to a potluck for volunteers. Maggie brought a simple salad, worrying it wouldn't measure up, but no one cared. They gathered in Rosa's cozy kitchen, dogs curled under the table, cats perched on countertops as if they owned the place. Between bites of lasagna and laughter, Maggie realized something. She wasn't sitting on the sidelines anymore. These people weren't just fellow volunteers. They were friends. Tom told stories of his firefighting days, dramatic and funny. A college student named Jenna shared her dream of becoming a vet. Rosa teased Maggie gently about Domino's obsession with her. "Face it," Rosa said, grinning. "That dog has chosen you." Maggie laughed, but her heart skipped. Domino had, in a way. And so had this community. The shelter also began leaning on her more. Tara asked her to mentor new volunteers. "You've got a calming presence," she explained. "People trust you. Animals too." Maggie doubted herself at first, but when a nervous teenager named Kayla shadowed her, she found the role surprisingly natural. "Don't rush," she told Kayla as they approached a shy cat. "Just sit. Let him come to you." Minutes later, the cat crept into Kayla's lap. The girl's face lit up, and Maggie felt a swell of pride, not in herself, but in passing on something she'd learned. One March afternoon, the shelter held an adoption event at a local park. Maggie stood by Rusty's side, gently stroking his fur as families passed. He still wasn't ready to leave, but she wasn't discouraged. Across the field, Domino bounded joyfully with children, his spots gleaming in the sun. Then it happened. A young couple knelt beside Domino, laughing as he rolled onto his back for belly rubs. An hour later, they filled out adoption papers. Maggie watched, heart full and aching all at once. She knew this was the goal, for the dogs to find homes. Yet the thought of saying goodbye to Domino tightened her throat. Tara touched her arm. "He's going to a wonderful family. You helped make him ready." Tears pricked Maggie's eyes. "I'll miss him." "You should. That's how you know you loved him right." That evening, Maggie sat in her kitchen, Domino's empty kennel echoing in her mind. She poured herself a cup of tea and let herself cry. But beneath the sadness was something steadier, pride, gratitude, the quiet joy of having given him a chance at life. As spring turned the trees green again, Maggie's role at the shelter continued to grow. She spoke at more fundraisers, helped plan events, even wrote short stories for the shelter's newsletter. Her words resonated with donors and adopters alike. One evening, Tara handed her a stack of letters from supporters. "These are in response to your piece about Rusty," she said. "People loved it. They want to help." Maggie leafed through the notes, stunned. Strangers thanked her for giving a voice to animals who couldn't speak for themselves. One letter ended with, "You reminded me that it's never too late to start again, for animals or for people." Her throat tightened as she realized, her journey wasn't just about filling her own emptiness anymore. It was about showing others, women like her, families, anyone, that purpose could be rediscovered in unexpected places. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Community is more than people. It's connection. It's walking into a shelter full of barking dogs and knowing you're part of something bigger. It's laughter over soup, tears when a dog leaves, pride when a shy cat finally climbs into a lap. For years, I thought I had lost my place in the world. But here, among paw prints and friends, I found it again." She closed the book, listening to the quiet house around her. For the first time in years, the silence didn't ache. It hummed with belonging, with the echoes of voices and barks, with the steady rhythm of a life that mattered. By summer, Maggie's life had stretched and reshaped itself in ways she could never have predicted. What began as a twice-a-week volunteer shift had become the center of her days, the anchor that steadied her against the drift of loneliness. But now, something larger was stirring, something that went beyond cleaning kennels and walking dogs. Maggie was becoming a voice. It started small. Tara asked her to write a short post for the shelter's Facebook page about Rusty. "Just tell his story," Tara said. "People respond to honesty." Maggie hesitated. She wasn't a writer, not really. She'd written lesson plans and report cards, not stories for strangers. But that evening, she sat at her kitchen table, pen in hand, and thought of Rusty's trembling body, his slow steps toward trust, the first time he wagged his tail. Her words came gently, like water finding its way around rocks. "Rusty came to us broken. He didn't believe people could be kind. Day by day, he is teaching us the power of patience, and we are teaching him the power of love." She sent it off, cheeks warm with doubt. 2 days later, Tara called, her voice electric. "Maggie." The post went viral. Hundreds of shares. Donations coming in. People are writing, asking how they can help. Maggie blinked at her phone, stunned. All she had done was tell the truth. But the truth, it seemed, had power. Soon, Tara asked for more. Could she write a piece about Domino's adoption? About Max learning to trust? About the kittens tumbling over each other in play? Maggie wrote them all. Each post carried a bit of her heart, and people noticed. Strangers left comments. "This reminds me of the dog I rescued. Thank you for giving these animals a voice. I'm 52 and just retired. This makes me want to volunteer too." For the first time in years, Maggie felt that her words mattered beyond the walls of her own home. Then came the newsletter. The shelter needed a volunteer to write feature stories for donors. Maggie's name rose instantly to the top. "Me?" She laughed when Tara suggested it. "I'm just a retired teacher." "Exactly," Tara replied. "Teachers know how to tell stories that touch people." So she tried. She wrote about Rosa ladling soup at lunch, about Tom's gentle way with anxious dogs, about Kayla, the shy teenager, finding confidence when a kitten curled in her lap. She wrote about the community that had become her family. When the newsletter went out, donations spiked. A local paper even reprinted her piece on Rusty, calling it a reminder of resilience, both human and animal. Maggie cut out the article and pinned it to her fridge, her heart swelling. She hadn't expected recognition, but she felt proud, not for herself alone, but for the shelter, for the animals, for the reminder that stories could change things. Meanwhile, her family noticed the change in her. On a phone call, Sarah said, "Mom, you sound like you found your calling." Maggie chuckled. "I don't know if it's a calling. But it feels, right? Like all the pieces of my life finally make sense." "You're inspiring me," Sarah admitted. "Nursing can be exhausting, and sometimes I forget why I started. But listening to you reminds me that purpose matters more than paychecks." Ben echoed the sentiment weeks later. "You're proof it's never too late to start again, Mom." That's huge for me. Hearing her children say those words filled Maggie with something deeper than pride. It felt like legacy. The shelter invited her to speak at a small donor dinner. At first, she wanted to decline. Public speaking made her stomach twist, but Rosa convinced her. "You don't have to perform," Rosa said. "Just tell them the truth, like you always do." So she stood at a lectern in a borrowed dress, hands trembling, and told the story of Rusty. She spoke of his fear, his slow steps toward trust, and what he had taught her about healing. When she finished, the room was silent. Then applause filled the space, warm and genuine. A woman approached afterward, tears in her eyes. "I lost my husband last year," she said softly. "I've been so lost. Hearing you tonight, it gave me hope." Maggie held her hand, feeling the echo of her own journey. "Hope is still there," she whispered. By fall, Maggie had become more than a volunteer. She was an advocate. She started a blog, Paw Prints and Purpose, where she wrote about midlife reinvention, about animals, about the lessons they gave her. The audience grew steadily: women over 40, empty nesters, retirees, anyone searching for meaning. Her most read post was titled "It's Never Too Late to Begin Again." In it she wrote, "At 55, I thought my life was winding down. Instead, it was beginning again. The animals saved me as much as I saved them. Purpose doesn't fade with age, it waits for us to notice it." Emails poured in from readers across the country. Some shared stories of adopting shelter pets. Others confessed their loneliness. Many simply said, "Thank you. I thought I was the only one." Maggie read each message, her heart swelling with connection. She realized she wasn't just writing for herself anymore. She was writing for women like her, for all the quiet houses, the silent dinners, the hearts waiting to be filled again. One evening, she sat in her kitchen, laptop open, candle burning on the counter. Rusty lay curled at her feet, still waiting for the right adopter, but now calm, steady, almost unrecognizable from the trembling dog she'd first met. She looked at him and whispered, "You gave me a purpose, Rusty." He lifted his head, eyes soft, as if to say he knew. Maggie smiled, fingers moving across the keyboard. Her next blog post would be about him, about how healing comes when we least expect it. She paused, gazing at the candle's flame. The woman she had been a year ago, lonely, restless, unsure, felt distant now. In her place stood someone fuller, braver, purposeful. Her second act wasn't about chasing achievement. It was about belonging, about connection, about giving and receiving love in the simplest of ways. And for the first time in years, Maggie felt not just alive, but necessary. The first anniversary of Maggie's volunteering fell on a crisp October morning. The trees blazed with fiery reds and golds along the road to the shelter, their leaves swirling down like confetti celebrating the end of one season and the beginning of another. Maggie drove with the windows cracked just enough to let in the scent of autumn, her heart both calm and full. It was hard to believe a year had passed since that first hesitant drive, when she almost kept going instead of stopping at the little building with the paw print mural. Harder still to believe how much had changed since she whispered, "Maybe tomorrow, I'll stop the car." Inside the shelter, things looked both familiar and different. New faces filled the kennels, while old friends like Max and Domino had long since found homes. Rusty, though, was still there, but not trembling anymore. He padded forward at the sound of Maggie's voice, tail wagging, eyes warm. "Hey, handsome," she greeted, slipping him a treat. "1 year, can you believe it?" Rosa appeared behind her, balancing a basket of laundry. "Hard to imagine this place without you now," she said, grinning. "Remember how nervous you were that first week?" Maggie laughed. "I thought the noise would knock me over. But now it sounds like music." Later that day, the shelter hosted its fall open house, a celebration for volunteers and adopters. Maggie stood near the welcome table, handing out cider and cookies. Families bustled through the doors, children tugging parents toward the puppies, couples cooing over kittens. At one point, a woman with silver hair paused at Maggie's table. "I read your blog," she said, her voice soft. "It gave me the courage to volunteer at my own shelter. I just wanted to say thank you." Maggie's throat tightened. She reached across the table and squeezed the woman's hand. "I'm glad it helped. That's what stories are for." As the afternoon waned, the shelter's director called everyone together. "I want to thank each of you for making this place a family, for the animals and for each other. And I'd like to recognize someone who has become the heart of our community." To Maggie's surprise, her name was called. Blushing, she stepped forward as applause filled the room. The director handed her a framed certificate that read, "Volunteer of the Year." Tears pricked Maggie's eyes as she held it. She glanced around at the faces, Rosa, Tom, Tara, the young volunteers, the families who had adopted pets, and felt a surge of belonging so strong it nearly knocked her off her feet. "This place saved me as much as it saved them," she said softly, gesturing toward the kennels. The crowd nodded, many wiping their eyes. That night, back in her quiet kitchen, Maggie set the certificate on the counter. Rusty lay at her feet, head on his paws, eyes closed in contentment. The house was still, but the silence no longer pressed in with loneliness. It hummed with echoes of laughter, paw steps, meows, and barks. She opened her journal, the same one that had once held words of grief and invisibility, and wrote, "1 year ago, I thought my story was over. I thought purpose had left with my husband, with my children, with my career. But the animals taught me something different. Purpose doesn't fade with age. It waits, patient, like a dog in the corner of a kennel, watching with hopeful eyes. All it takes is courage to step forward and open the door." She closed the journal, smiling through her tears. Weeks later, Rusty found his forever home. A retired couple adopted him, drawn by Maggie's blog post about his healing journey. When they came to pick him up, Maggie crouched to stroke his fur one last time. "You're ready," she whispered. "Go live the life you deserve." Rusty licked her hand gently, as if to say goodbye. Watching him walk out the door, Maggie's heart broke and healed in the same breath. She cried, of course. But underneath the ache was pride, because she had helped him reach this moment, just as he had helped her reach hers. A week later, Maggie returned to the shelter. A new intake had arrived, a shy speckled puppy curled in the corner of a kennel, trembling. Maggie crouched and whispered, "Hello there." The puppy peeked up, wide-eyed. Maggie smiled, her heart steady and strong. "Don't worry. You're safe now. We'll figure this out together." And in that moment, she realized her life had come full circle. Not an ending. Not even a beginning. But a continuation, one paw print at a time, one connection at a time, one purpose renewed in the most unexpected of places.